Now, one other power that the National Assembly, particularly the Senate, has is the power of confirmation. Yes. Nominees from the executive for various positions. That in itself generated a great deal of controversy. At some point, the vice president was quoted as saying that there are certain categories of nominees. He was quoting the law, so it was said that do not require Senate approval. The Senate responded by quoting law as well, that that's not correct. That you know, and I raise this because it had impact. Many of the nominees who got stuck in between were nominees for agencies and parastatals that were critical to the smooth running of the economy, the CBN and the IC, a number of other bodies like that. More recently, there seems to have been some rapprochement between the executive over that, and so a number of those nominees have been allowed to pass. But then the key issue that created the problem seems not to have been resolved. Who is right over the issue of powers to confirm nominees according to the law? You're a lawyer, and a very senior one at that. Who is right?
Well, first of all, let us understand the history of this issue of confirmation. We drew inspiration regarding our 1999 Constitution for America. You know, so we chose to run a presidential system of government as opposed to the parliamentary system we've done in the 60s. And so in America, you have also provision for confirmation of certain appointments. And like the Nigerian Constitution, that is the domain of the Senate. So American Senate confirms certain categories of nominees. So we simply borrowed that from America. And you can't even contemplate that you will, for instance, in America, send the name of a nominee for an appointment. And before he will start the work, before he gets confirmed, he'll go and start the work. You can't even contemplate it. But it happens in Nigeria, and still happening. So that's what started all the conflicts. It's of people encroaching the powers of the other. So the thing that makes democracy to survive is what we call separation of powers. And unless we begin to respect that doctrine of separation of powers, we'll continue to have problems with our democracy. We must know the limits of each other. So, and that's why we have checks and balances, so that we don't have excesses. Because if you now say, you just appoint any person, post it to wherever, somebody might be tempted to appoint people from one family or from his own family and distribute them all the parastatals, all the agencies of government, make all of them ministers. So, but because there's power of confirmation, then there's this restriction to do the right thing, to ensure federal character, to ensure that the right people are put on board. You know, so that is why it's very necessary that this issue of the confirmation rights of the National Assembly must be respected. You may be in the executive today, as we have seen before, and then tomorrow you must be in the legislature. So you will say, okay, you want the latitude to do whatever you want. But when you come to the parliament, you'll not be able to see the wisdom in making sure that some other people have another look at these appointees to ensure that they're qualified, to ensure that it's evenly distributed, you know, and ensure that there are people with capacity. So that's the critical point. So I don't see anything wrong in retaining the powers of confirmation for the National Assembly. And there's nothing to be in a hurry about to tell somebody to go and start a job for which requires confirmation when he has not been confirmed. And you say it's acting. I mean, that's part of the thing that causes tension. The best thing you do is to call the members of the National Assembly and say, look, this is urgent. Please do whatever you can and then get this done. It's called lobbying. It's the approach. But when you just throw it on the National Assembly and tell the man to go and start, what you expect is crisis. So these are just human relations that at sometimes we take for granted. That's what causes most of the problem.
Another subject that has caused tension recently, and I know it's coming to the National Assembly, we just don't know when, is the issue of the minimum wage. Regardless of what has been happening so far, it has to come to the National Assembly because it has to be made into a law before anything can happen to it. Without putting you in the position where you already say something before it is brought before you, how do you think we can resolve? Because it seems as if each time this subject comes up for discussion, there's this racket. The labor is saying one thing, the government is saying another, and then in the middle, there are people who don't really understand why there's so much brouhaha. Like in other countries, they have minimum wage, and they've designed it in such a way that it doesn't come up like this in debates all the time. How do you think we could go around resolving this?
Well, one of the major issues around the issue of minimum wage, again, has to do with the structure of our federalism. Because right now the issue of wages is in the exclusive list. So only the federal government can negotiate and decide what the minimum wage for the country will be. That's why most times when they bring these governors to the negotiation table, they will not surrender easily, because if the federal government has the capacity to pay, there are states that will not have the capacity to pay. And those states will keep resisting it. So in the past, we have suggested that we put wages, salaries and wages under concurrent list, so that each state will determine how much they can pay. But Labour had resisted it at all material time. And maybe they have their own reason. They came up with a number of issues. Okay. So that is critical. But for me as an individual, I believe that the minimum wage you have in Nigeria now is not sustainable. It's not a living wage. It's not enough to keep a family. It is not. There's a need to increase it. So even when I'm talking about 30,000 naira, no, I don't believe that that's sufficient. We need to do something much more than that. All we need to do is to cut expenses in other areas. Because these monies, of course, will have to be spent. People have to pay tax on it, and they can also expand the economy. And you can see, recently South Africa had increased their own minimum wage, and this is countries within the continent that are competing with us in terms of the economy. So we must make sure that we have something that will be able to take care of any person who is working in Nigeria.
Finally, a lot of people are watching this, and many of them are apprehensive about the elections. They were maybe even more than they were in 2015. What would you say to them to look out for that, in your view, would determine what exactly is going to happen come February?
INEC must continue to assure the people that they're going to be neutral. If they can never get tired of saying it. The same thing with the security agencies, the police, the army, and the other security agencies are involved in the election, unfortunately. They must keep saying, we are not going to favor any particular party, we will not allow ourselves to be used by any candidate or any political party. This assurance is also very important. And as I said, they can continue that, even it means sounding like broken records, they need to keep saying this. And the international community must be on everybody's neck to say that this happened. They will not accept any result that is less than transparent. So once we have this consciousness and everybody is committed to it, I'm sure we can get it right. But once they're approaching any election, especially in Africa, there's tension. People are apprehensive. So, but the important thing here is, what do we do, as the important institutions of democracy to ensure that everybody is comfortable going to an election? And we can do that. Those assurances are critical. And I expect that this will happen, in a matter of weeks, including calling meetings of relevant political parties, to ensure that they get the assurances that requires, some comfort going to the election. Then there's another aspect I also need to mention. We have proliferation of political parties.
Yes, 91 in all.
Yeah, so we believe it's unworthy. So what we have done, which I'm happy the President signed that aspect of constitutional amendment, is that if you field a candidate for president as a party, if you are at liberty not to run in any election, so you can remain as a political party so long as you don't run in any election. But if you make the mistake of fielding a candidate for presidential election, if you don't get 25% of the vote cast in at least one state, that party will be registered. And then if you make the mistake of fielding a candidate for gubernatorial election, and you don't win at least one local government, that party will be registered. And if you run for local government election and you do not win one ward, that means you don't have one councillor in that election, that's the end of their political party. And if you run for Senate or House of Representatives or for for
state
assembly. And of course, you do not win any ward. That's the end of your political party. So we believe that at the end of this exercise in 2019, these political parties you are seeing will drop to not more than 5. So it's one of the key things provided they will be able to provide for under this current constitutional amendment. And I think it's something that will help to bring some sanity in the number of political parties who keep promoting Nigeria.
Your Excellency, the Deputy Senate President, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.